over fields of green, remembering the faces, the moments unseen, the hands that built a dynasty, the vision in their eyes, echoes in the auction ball beneath an endless sky. This is the bullvine, turn the volume high, for the icons of the ages that never will die. From the show ring thunder to the quiet strength they knew, hear their stories now, coming right on through.
Hey there, dairy enthusiasts. Welcome back to the Bullvine Podcast. I'm your host, and today I've got an absolutely incredible story for you. We're going back to what I call dairy's wildest gold rush, a time when Manhattan millionaires were bidding $250,000 for cows, when farmers became overnight millionaires, and when a single line of tax code accidentally triggered the most explosive era in Holstein history. Now, I know what you're thinking. Come on, how could tax code possibly make for an exciting story? But trust me on this one, this is a tale that's got everything. Financial thriller meets rural America, dreams, fortunes, betrayals, and even a Beatle buying Holstein cattle. Yes, you heard that right. John Lennon of the Beatles was investing in dairy cows. So grab your coffee, settle in, and let me tell you about the investor herd era of the 1970s and 80s. A period that fundamentally changed our industry and offers some pretty sobering lessons for today's dairy operators. Picture this. It's 1968. Lyndon Johnson is in his final year as president, and buried deep in the Internal Revenue Code, Section 46 slips into law as quietly as a barn cat stalking mice. The agricultural press barely noticed it. Urban dwellers knew nothing about it. Even most dairy farmers just shrugged their shoulders. But here's the thing about legislation. Sometimes the most innocent-looking provisions can have the most explosive consequences. What Johnson's government intended as a modest tax shelter for wealthy taxpayers accidentally unleashed something unprecedented: the investment purchase credit. Now, let me break this down for you, because the mechanics were brilliant in their simplicity. The wealthy could purchase a dairy cow with just a nominal down payment and a promissory note. But here's the kicker. The tax credits they received during the payment period would actually cover the cost of the animal. It was like getting a free cow if you knew how to work the system. Our first protagonist is John Sullivan, a guy who embodied the American dream wrapped in coveralls and ambition. Picture a Cornell-trained farm boy, eldest of 9 kids from a Guernsey farm in Holcomb, New York. This guy worked his way through college, milking cows at dawn and studying animal husbandry until midnight. By the early 1970s, Sullivan was killing it selling Harvestor silos across New York State. 4 national awards, recognition as one of America's outstanding young men, the guy was successful. But then he partnered with Glenn Tripp to form Leadfield Associates, and that's when things got really interesting. These guys became known as the big buyers. By 1974, they were sweeping across the United States and Canada like art collectors acquiring masterpieces, assembling an incredible constellation of genetic excellence. But here's what made Sullivan revolutionary. He had one simple rule that changed everything. Never buy a show cow without a complete pedigree. Now, this might sound obvious to us today, but back then, it was radical thinking. Sullivan figured out that the most expensive cows were those in the $2,000 price range, animals that looked impressive but lacked the genetic foundation to justify their cost. He demanded that every purchase have an excellent dam or several generations of very good classifications behind her. And boy, did this strategy pay off. At the 1972 Wintercrest Invitational Sale, Sullivan partnered with Stuart Hutchins to buy Wintercrest Sunlee for $20,000. A sum that made headlines but would soon seem quaint. A year later, they acquired 5 members of the legendary Crago family from Washington State, including Crago Telstar Bonaventure, who became part of the first 95-point dam-daughter combination in breed history. But their crown jewel? Mdeed Maple Lawn Marquis, Glamour. the 1971 All-American 4-year-old that commanded $74,000. When she walked into their barn, heavy with a calf by the legendary Osborndale Ivanhoe, they weren't just buying a cow, they were purchasing a piece of Holstein immortality. Now, while Sullivan was building his empire in upstate New York, about 150 miles south in Walton, a failed real estate broker named George Morgan was about to stumble upon the opportunity of several lifetimes. And folks, Morgan's story reads like a financial thriller. Born in Scotch Plains, New Jersey, Morgan had fallen in love with Holsteins as a boy on his uncle's farm. This guy was so obsessed, he covered the walls of an unheated room in his childhood home with Holstein pedigrees, most of them Dunlogan bloodlines. He'd read the Diamond Jubilee edition of Holstein history cover to cover, then read it again. By 1965, Morgan was living his dream on a farm in Walton, New York, milking a modest herd. But here's the harsh reality. He was drowning in debt. The relentless daily grind, thin margins, constant worry about making ends meet, it was wearing him down. With 5 bright children to educate, he made a pragmatic decision: enter real estate. And timing couldn't have been better. From 1969 to 1973, Morgan earned over $1 million in commissions selling rural properties to New York City businessmen seeking weekend retreats. The guy was crushing it. But then came the 1973 oil crisis. Overnight, his real estate empire crumbled when gasoline prices made the drive from Manhattan to the countryside prohibitively expensive. Suddenly, Morgan had time on his hands and a burning question: how could anyone justify paying astronomical prices for Holstein cattle? So he did what any good entrepreneur would do. He studied the system. Months of diving into the U.S. tax code, understanding the investment purchase credit and rapid depreciation systems. Here's how elegant the mechanics were. An entrepreneur could purchase a cow for $2,000, charge an investor $3,000, and guarantee replacement if the animal died. The investor would pay $300 down and receive an immediate $300 tax rebate from the government. They could then depreciate the cow by 22% in the first year. The entrepreneur held the investor's note while owing a similar note to the original farmer. In 1972, Morgan organized his first investor group, 6 New York businessmen he'd met during his real estate days. When he announced he was open for business, it marked the beginning of what would become the largest and most influential cattle investment operation in history. Partnering with certified public accountant George Teichner, Morgan launched Dreamstreet Holsteins, Inc. And folks, the results were nothing short of spectacular. By 1979, they were managing 1,200 cows across 18 farms organized into 6 farm satellites, each with its own manager. The Holstein Friesian World captured the phenomenon in a 1975 article titled "Who is George Morgan?" The publication marveled at a man who'd purchased over $500,000 worth of registered Holsteins in just 2 years. This guy paid $16,000 for the top lot at the Vermont State Sale and spent $104,800 for 7 head at the Royal Aaronwood Sale. Morgan's success came from his deep understanding of both genetics and marketing. He was particularly successful with daughters of Round Oak Rag Apple Elevation, breeding more than 40 excellent scoring offspring, more than any other breeder, according to Select Sire's George Miller. Now here's where the story gets absolutely wild. Are you ready for this? John Lennon of the Beatles, yes, that John Lennon, decided to stake his fortune on Holstein genetics. According to Edward Young Morwick's historical account, Lennon threw so much money in the pot that they had to get rid of some of it very quickly. So Morgan and Teichner used Lennon's investment to purchase Spring Farm Fawn Rose for $56,000, a heifer calf by Matt out of Spring Farm Citation Rosetta. The investment proved as golden as Lennon's musical touch. When they sold Rose in the Summer Dreams by Dreamstreet sale of 1980, she commanded $250,000, representing a 347% return in just a few years. Think about that for a moment. The sight of a Beatles' money flowing into Holstein breeding programs wasn't just a curiosity, it was validation that these tax shelters had transcended agricultural circles to capture the imagination of global celebrities. When the man who wrote Imagine was imagining Holstein profits, you knew something extraordinary was happening in American agriculture. But perhaps the most unlikely chapter unfolded at Hilltop Hanover Farm in Yorktown Heights, New York, where 5 stockbrokers from the same Wall Street office decided to take their Holstein investments to the next level. Stanley Cheslock, B., Giles Brophy, John Knight, Frank Sands, and John Seitz had all purchased cattle through Dreamstreet's investment programs, but they wanted something more tangible. They convinced Dave Younger, this legendary manager who'd spent decades perfecting his craft with Guernseys and draft horses, to help them purchase the former Crystal estate and develop an elite Holstein operation. The vision was audacious. Wall Street money would create a showcase herd combining the best genetics with the finest management. And it worked. A 1977 classification found 41 head averaging 88.7 points, with 20 excellent and 20 very good animals. By the early 1990s, they'd bred and developed over 50 excellent cows. Younger's management philosophy was beautifully simple. First, you have to take good care of the cattle. Especially important is taking extremely good care of every calf that's born. The calves are the payback. Next, you have to promote the investor's cattle, and most importantly, you have to show them a little income from time to time. Their 1990 partial dispersal totaled $1.79 million on 180 head, the highest grossing Holstein sale of the year. But no story from this era is more emblematic of both its promise and perils than Jack Stookey's. Jack was the youngest of 3 sons from Leesburg, Indiana, possessed of what his mother Mary believed was a golden touch that could do no wrong. His older brother George had discovered Floristin, the substance in toothpaste that prevents cavities, and sold his patent to Procter & Gamble for a fortune. Jack's early life read like an all-American success story. Track and field star, scholarship to Wayland Baptist University, where he set state records. But when he returned to Leesburg in 1968, he initially got into automobile racing, designing and building his own cars from scratch. His mother protested. His wife Darla put her foot down about the dangers, so Jack redirected his competitive drive toward the family Holstein herd. By 1980, the Stookey herd had reached its peak. 30 excellent and 33 very good females on a 1,500-acre showplace. But Jack's vision extended far beyond the family farm. He would create an investor herd that assembled the best Holsteins North America had to offer. The investment purchase credit attracted individuals earning $500,000 annually and upward, and Indianapolis had plenty of people in that category. Soon, money was flowing to Stookey from California, Florida, Georgia, from all over the country. His best year was 1983, when he took home the premier exhibitor banner at Central National Show and came within a whisker of repeating at Eastern and Western Nationals. He owned 3 All-Americans or reserves that year alone. But the Internal Revenue Service had been watching these livestock investment shelters with growing suspicion. In the early 1980s, they began challenging many of them through audits. Jack Stookey found himself squarely in their crosshairs when they disallowed many of his tax loss claims and demanded payment of back taxes in 6 figures. The financial pressure manifested in heartbreaking ways. On a Saturday afternoon in winter 1985, Stookey couldn't pay his hired help, so he instructed them to load a trailer with bull calves destined for slaughter, animals he'd previously planned to sell for breeding purposes. Among them were 3 sons of Continental Scarlet by Roybrook Telstar. An AI stud had already spoken for one of the red and white bulls, but Jack couldn't wait. And then nature added cruel irony to financial disaster. A devastating blizzard buried 100 calf hutches in snow. They didn't get the calves dug out in time, and they all suffocated, including 18 calves by Enhancer out of Scarlet. The image of those buried hutches became a metaphor for dreams smothered by circumstances beyond anyone's control. Rumors began circulating, checks bouncing at the Canadian border, a disgruntled investor allegedly dynamiting the porch off his house. Whether true or false, the stories transformed Stookey from a local legend into a pariah in the larger Holstein world. When the IRS filed a lien for back taxes, Stookey filed for bankruptcy. The proceedings created legal chaos as breeders who'd sold him cattle with only partial payment argued they still owned the animals. The end came swiftly and brutally for many. Dreamstreet's Frank Wood initially prospered through the early 1980s. In 1983, their peak year, Dreamstreet presented both the Grand and Reserve Grand Champion females at Central National Show, an accomplishment achieved only once before in breed history. But changing tax laws and market conditions eventually caught up with them. The stock market crash of October 1987 sent their joint venture into receivership. By 1990, 4,000 head of the former Dreamstreet herd were sold to Mastok Montezuma, effectively ending one of the most ambitious cattle operations in history. For Jack Stookey, the denouement was even more tragic. After his bankruptcy, he moved to Tulsa, Oklahoma, joining a firm selling U.S. currency to foreign investors. But the IRS never lost interest. In 2007, they came back with a tax arrears claim totaling $1.5 million. Unable to face another prosecution, Jack drove down a back road and ended his life. The investment credit provision was repealed by the Tax Reform Act of 1986, officially ending the era. Now you might be thinking, great story, but what does this have to do with my operation today? Well, everything. The investor era offers profound lessons for modern dairy operations navigating our own period of rapid change. Today's producers face external forces just as disruptive as Section 46. Environmental regulations, carbon credit markets, consolidation pressures, technological disruption. First, document everything ruthlessly. Sullivan's insistence on complete pedigrees and genetic documentation proved prescient. Today's equivalent, comprehensive genomic testing, health records, production data. The farms that survive market volatility are those with bulletproof documentation. Second, understand your capital structure. The investor era collapsed when highly leveraged operations couldn't service debt during market downturns. Build equity reserves, maintain diverse revenue streams. Today's most successful dairies aren't just milk producers, they're energy generators, carbon credit earners, genetic suppliers. Third, time market cycles strategically. Morgan's God makes cows every day philosophy applies to today's genetic markets. Know when to sell embryos, semen rights, equity positions. Fourth, build sustainable management systems. Younger's focus on calf care and investor relations translates directly to modern stakeholder management. Whether dealing with lenders, investors, or family members, consistent communication and demonstrable results are essential. Finally, prepare for regulatory disruption. The Tax Reform Act of 1986 ended the investor era overnight. Today's equivalent disruptions could include carbon taxation, methane regulations, animal welfare mandates. Successful operations plan for multiple scenarios. The investor herd era stands as perhaps the most dramatic chapter in Holstein history, a time when government tax policy inadvertently created a perfect storm of Wall Street money and genetic ambition. The results were spectacular. Record-breaking prices, revolutionary breeding programs, genetic advances that continue influencing the breed today. Yet the human cost was equally dramatic. For every George Morgan who navigated the era successfully, there was a Jack Stookey whose dreams turned to nightmares. The lesson for today's dairy industry is sobering. External forces can reshape everything overnight. The survivors weren't necessarily the smartest or most ambitious. They were those who understood that in agriculture, as in life, the only constant is change. As we face our own era of transformation, with technology, sustainability demands, and global markets reshaping dairy farming, the investor herd story reminds us that fortune favors not just the bold, but the prepared. Edward Young Morwick said it best in his original account. If such times do come again, rejoice and be exceedingly glad. As a Holstein breeder, you've been handed the keys to the kingdom. The question isn't whether such times will come again, it's whether we'll be ready when they do. What does this mean for your operation? Start building the documentation, capital reserves, and strategic relationships you'll need to capitalize on the next wave of industry transformation. Because trust me, it's coming sooner than you think. That's our story for today, folks. The wild tale of when Wall Street invaded the barn, and the lessons it holds for all of us in today's rapidly changing dairy industry. Thanks for joining me on the Bullvine Podcast. If you enjoyed this deep dive into dairy history, make sure to subscribe and share it with fellow producers who might find these lessons valuable. Until next time, keep breeding better, keep thinking strategically, and remember, in this industry, the only constant is change. This has been the Bullvine Podcast. I'm your host, and we'll see you next time.
This is the Bullvine. Turn the volume high for the icons of the ages that never will die. From the show-ring thunder to the quiet strength they knew. Hear their stories now, coming right on through. Oh, tell the tale, the Bullvine. Legends live here.